The Galactic Empire required tribute. Humanity declared war. Part 5. A New Order. The Vel'Karath did not call it a surrender. They were careful about that. Very deliberate. The formal communication they sent to the United Earth Council 11 days after the home system engagement used the word dialogue 4 times, and the phrase mutual interest 7 times, and never once acknowledged that they had lost. They were an empire that had existed for 4,000 years, and they had the pride to match that age, the deep institutional inability to say plainly that they had been wrong. But they had contacted humanity first. Ara read the communication twice, set it down, and allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of sitting with her eyes closed and her hands flat on the desk before she composed herself and called Junho. "They want to talk," she said. "Yes," said Junho. "I am going to need you there." "Yes," he said again. The neutral station chosen for the negotiations was an old trading post at the edge of what had been Vel'Karath-controlled space for 3 centuries. A battered, practical place full of species from half a dozen worlds, who had all learned to do business without asking too many questions. It smelled like machine oil and 3 different kinds of alien food, and had lighting that nobody had fully fixed in approximately 40 years. Ara arrived with a delegation of 12. Junho was there. So were Day and Rin, who had both been asked to come in their dress uniforms, which neither of them particularly enjoyed wearing. Hana came as part of the analytical staff, quiet and observant, the kind of person who could stand in a room full of important people and be completely unnoticed until she said something that changed everything. Sora had not been invited in any official capacity, but had attached herself to the technical advisory group, with the cheerful certainty of someone who knew nobody was going to make a serious effort to remove her. Wu was not there. He was still running resupply operations, which were unglamorous and essential and suited him perfectly. He had sent Rin a short message when he heard about the negotiations. It said, simply, "Make it count." She intended to. The Vel'Karath delegation was larger, 23 members, which Hana privately noted was a dominance display, the kind of thing you did when you wanted to communicate importance without saying anything out loud. Their senior negotiator was an older being, gray-skinned like the ambassador who had delivered the original tribute demand, with the same mirror-like eyes. But where the ambassador had carried itself with the comfortable confidence of something that had never been seriously challenged, this negotiator moved carefully, deliberately, like something that was paying attention. His name, transliterated into sounds that human mouths could approximate, came out as something close to Vren. Ara decided to call him that. The opening session was 3 hours of procedural discussion: who would speak, in what order, on what topics, with what process for translation and verification. Standard diplomatic machinery, the kind that existed to give both sides time to look at each other before the real conversation began. Ara had sat through dozens of sessions like it in her career. She was patient. She let it run. At the end of the 3rd hour, Vren looked at her across the table and said without any of the procedural language, "Your people should not have been able to do what they did." Ara met his eyes. "And yet." A pause. "And yet," he agreed. It was, she would think later, the most honest thing said in the entire negotiation. The terms humanity presented were not gentle, but they were not cruel. Ara had thought carefully about cruelty, about what it would do to a peace that needed to actually hold, about what kind of galaxy humanity wanted to live in when this was over. Crushing the Vel'Karath was satisfying to think about in the abstract, and deeply impractical in reality. An empire that felt it had been humiliated would spend the next century looking for a way to recover its pride. That was not a problem humanity needed. What humanity needed was an arrangement that made attacking Earth structurally unattractive for the foreseeable future. So the terms were these: all Vel'Karath military forces were to withdraw from human space within 60 days. Every species currently held in labor servitude under the tribute system was to be released over the following 2 years, with transport assistance provided by the Empire. The tribute system itself, the entire legal and bureaucratic apparatus the Empire used to collect living beings from developing species, was to be formally dissolved. The Velkarath would pay reparations in the form of technology transfers, specifically in the areas of medical science and energy production, to be distributed not just to humanity, but to every species that had suffered under the tribute system. And humanity would receive a permanent seat on the Galactic Council, the ancient governing body that had for 4,000 years been controlled entirely by the Empire and its client states. Vren listened to all of it without expression. Then he said, "You are asking us to fundamentally change how we relate to the rest of the galaxy." "Yes," said Ara. "That is not a small thing." "No," she agreed, "it is not. But you have 2 options. You can accept these terms, retain your empire, and find a new way of existing in a galaxy where humanity is present and prepared. Or you can reject them, and we will go back to war." She paused. "We are very good at war. We have also discovered that we do not enjoy it. But we will do it." Vren was quiet for a long time, long enough that several people in the room shifted in their seats. "I will present this to the Emperor," he said finally. "You have 5 days," said Ara. The answer came in 4. The signing ceremony was held in the same neutral station, in a larger room that still had the bad lighting and the smell of machine oil. Nobody had bothered to decorate it. Hana had suggested that was probably fine. There was something appropriate about signing a new chapter of galactic history in a place that looked like it had seen a great deal of history already and was not particularly impressed by any of it. Ara signed first on behalf of the United Earth Council, then Vren on behalf of the Velkarath Emperor, then the representatives of 11 other species who had been contacted in the preceding days, species that had lived under the tribute system for generations, and had arrived at the neutral station with varying degrees of shock and disbelief and a careful, fragile kind of hope. When it was done, Day and Rin and Hana and Sora stood behind Admiral Junho and Secretary General Ara in the fading light of the station's broken fixtures. And there were no speeches and no fireworks. Just a room full of people and beings who were all in their different ways trying to understand what had just happened. Later, when the delegations had dispersed and the station had gone back to its ordinary business of trading and noise, Junho stood alone at one of the external observation ports. The stars outside were the same stars they had always been, indifferent and ancient and vast. He had been looking at them all his life, and they had never looked back. He thought about the 412 crew members lost in the first engagement, the 63 who had not survived Kepler, the 2 ships that had burned in the home system approach. He thought about Wu pulling survivors out of failing ships with cargo tools, and Rin with dried blood on her face asking how many, and Sora in an alien engine room eating a forgotten nutrition bar and seeing something nobody else had thought to look for. He thought about the tribute demand, 1 billion people, delivered within 90 days, as if they were cargo. The stars looked back at him, or seemed to. He had always believed in a part of himself that he rarely talked about, that the universe did not particularly care about humanity. That space was large and cold and full of things that were older and more powerful, and that humanity's survival depended on understanding that and preparing accordingly. He still believed it, but he also believed something else now, something the last several months had confirmed in a way that no amount of planning or preparation had fully prepared him for. The most dangerous thing in a cold universe was not the species with the largest ships, or the oldest empire, or the most powerful weapons. It was the species that had learned, from its own long and painful and glorious history, that survival required not just strength, but patience. And not just patience, but the willingness to act, completely and without hesitation, when patience finally ran out. Humanity had chosen peace for as long as peace was possible. Then it had chosen otherwise. And the galaxy, slowly, carefully, with the measured caution of something that had just learned a lesson it would not forget, was beginning to understand what that meant. Junho looked at the stars for a while longer. Then he went to find his crew. They came for tribute. They received a lesson. Carved into the entrance of the United Earth Council Chamber. Year 1 of the Galactic Accord. The Galactic Empire required tribute. Humanity declared war. Part 4. The Turning Point. The plan was Hana's idea. She was not a military commander. She was not even officially in the military. Her title was Senior Strategic Analyst, which was a bureaucratic label that covered a wide range of work that mostly involved sitting in a dark room with too much coffee and an enormous amount of data. She was 29 years old. She had never commanded a ship or fired a weapon. She had also, over the past 4 months, quietly built the most detailed intelligence map of Velkarath core space that any human being had ever possessed. It had started as a standard assignment: collect and organize whatever signals, sensor data, and navigational information had been gathered by human probes and intercepted Velkarath communications. Standard intelligence work. But Hana did not approach things in a standard way. She noticed patterns the way other people notice sounds, automatically, without effort, without being able to turn it off. And the patterns she found in 4 months of Velkarath communications data were extraordinary. She knew their patrol routes, not the ones they had published internally to their own regional commanders. Those were deliberately varied. She knew the real routes, the ones that emerged when you tracked actual ship movement over time, and filtered out the variations to find the underlying logic. She knew where their sensor coverage had gaps, because gaps in sensor coverage showed up as gaps in the communications traffic that sensors generated. She knew 3 gravitational shortcuts through the outer territories that Velkarath navigators avoided out of habit, even though they were perfectly safe. She knew this because no Velkarath ship had ever been recorded traveling through them, which was itself a kind of data. She put all of it together into a document, attached a proposal, and sent it to Admiral Junho. The proposal was simple, the way the most dangerous ideas usually were. Attack the Velkarath home system. Junho read the proposal at 2 in the morning, which was when he did his best reading because the station was quiet and nobody was coming in to interrupt him. He read it once quickly, then again slowly. Then he sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a while. The Velkarath home system. Nobody had ever attacked it. In 4,000 years of Empire history, no species had ever reached it with hostile intent. It was deep in core space, surrounded by layers of military infrastructure and defended by the largest concentration of warships in the known galaxy. Going there was, by any conventional military logic, suicidal. Junho looked at Hana's navigational data. He looked at the gap analysis. He looked at the 3 unused gravitational shortcuts, which if you connected them in the right sequence, created a path through Velkarath space that bypassed every major defensive installation. He looked at the timing windows, specific periods when the home system's orbital defense platforms were in maintenance cycles, their coverage reduced by up to 40%. He looked at all of it for a long time. Then he called Hana. She answered immediately, which told him she had not been sleeping either. She had dark circles under her eyes, and her hair was pulled back in the way people pulled their hair back when they had stopped caring about what they looked like, because they were too busy thinking about something important. "Walk me through the timing window," he said. She walked him through it. It was 18 days away, a maintenance cycle that the Velkarath ran every 4 years on their home system's primary defense platforms. a cycle that had shown up in their internal scheduling communications, which Sora's frequency breakthrough had made readable 3 weeks ago. The window lasted approximately 14 hours. During those 14 hours, 3 sections of the home system's orbital defense grid would be operating at reduced capacity. 14 hours is tight, Junho said. It is, Hana agreed. But the route gives us an approach vector that avoids their early warning systems entirely. By the time they know we are there, we will already be in the system. Junho was quiet for a moment. What is the goal? We cannot destroy their home system. We do not need to, Hana said. We just need to show them we can reach it. He understood immediately, and he realized she was right. The fleet that left humanity's staging area 16 days later was not large. 40 ships, Junho's best, fastest, most experienced. Rin commanded the flank group from a new vessel, her burns still healing, but her eyes sharp and her voice steady. Day led the forward element. Sora was on board Junho's flagship because she refused not to be, and Junho had decided not to fight that particular battle. They traveled the route Hana had mapped, moving in near silence through 3 gravitational shortcuts that felt wrong to travel through. The gravity gradients made the ships lurch and groan, but that delivered them exactly where the data said they would be. No Velkarath contacts, no alarms. On the 11th hour of travel, they came out of the final approach corridor, and the Velkarath homeworld filled their view screens. It was beautiful, in the way that a great city seen from a distance was beautiful. Layers of light and structure and movement, orbital rings carrying stations and shipyards, defense platforms arrayed in geometric patterns around the planet, ships moving between them in coordinated flows. It was the center of an empire that had existed for longer than human civilization had been writing things down. And they were inside its defenses. Sora looked at the view screen and felt something she had not expected. Not triumph, but something quieter, something like awe. Then the alarm started. The engagement lasted 11 hours. Humanity did not try to destroy the defense platforms. They hit power relays, specific surgical strikes that knocked systems offline without destroying them. They hit communications infrastructure, creating windows of confusion. They hit the shipyard that housed the flagship of the home fleet, not to destroy it, but to demonstrate that they could. They moved constantly, using the approach routes Hana had mapped and the communication frequencies Sora had cracked to stay one step ahead of the response. The Velkarath home defense forces were large and powerful, and completely unprepared for an enemy already inside their security perimeter. They scrambled. They overcorrected. They fired on each other twice in the confusion, which humanity had not planned for, but accepted gratefully. Rin's flank group took heavy fire in the 8th hour. 2 ships lost, 1 badly damaged. She held the line. Day's forward element pushed through a gap in the response pattern and reached the closest orbital position to the planet itself. Close enough that the ships were visible to the naked eye from the surface below. Then, Junho opened a broadcast channel. All frequencies, empire-wide. This is Admiral Junho of the United Earth Fleet. We are currently inside your home system. We have not come to destroy it. We have come to show you what you almost started. His voice was calm. It was always calm, which was one of the reasons people followed him. Stand down your forces in human space. Withdraw from our system. Open negotiations. If you do not, we will come back. And the next time, we will not stop at demonstrating capability. He closed the channel. Then he gave the order to withdraw, and 40 human ships, 37 now, after the losses in the 8th hour, began the long route home. The Velkarath Emperor had watched the engagement from his palace's situation room. He was surrounded by military advisors and council members who had been talking very loudly for the last 11 hours, and had gone completely silent in the last 30 seconds. He looked at the sensor display. The human ships were withdrawing. They were not pursuing. They were not pressing an advantage. They were leaving, deliberately, after achieving something that should have been impossible. He was a very old being. He had ruled for a long time. He had seen wars begin and end. He had seen species rise and fall. He understood power, how it worked, how it was projected, what it meant when someone demonstrated it without exercising it fully. The humans had not destroyed anything they could not afford to lose. They had not killed anyone they did not have to kill. They had come into the most defended place in the known galaxy and shown him, clearly and without any possible misunderstanding, that they could reach him. And then they had left. The Emperor looked at his advisors. They looked back at him. Nobody spoke. He turned back to the display, watched the last human ship disappear from sensors, and sat down very slowly. He needed to think. For the first time in 4,000 years of Imperial history, the Empire needed to think carefully about what it did next. The Galactic Empire required tribute. Humanity declared war. Part 3. The Cost of Pride. War, Commander Rin had always said, was not a thing that happened to people. It was a thing that happened through them. It moved through bodies and ships and decisions and fear, and came out the other side as something nobody had planned for. She believed that more than ever now, sitting in the wreckage of what had been her command bay 6 hours ago. The Kepler corridor engagement had not gone the way anyone had expected. The intelligence had been solid, or had seemed solid. A Vel'Karath patrol route, predictable and regular, moving through a stretch of space between two dense asteroid clusters that everyone called the Kepler corridor, because a navigation chart from 2 centuries ago had labeled it that, and the name had stuck. Rin's battalion, 12 ships, 180 crew, had moved into position behind the larger asteroids and waited. What they had not known was that the Vel'Karath had changed their patrol route 4 days prior. What had entered the corridor was not a patrol. It was a trap. 16 Vel'Karath warships came at them from 3 directions at once. They had known Rin's fleet was there, had known the position, the formation, the timing. Somebody somewhere had made a mistake. A communication intercepted, a signal traced, a pattern noticed, and Rin had not found out until the first volley hit the Chemsuri, her second ship in the formation, and cut it in half. She had 15 seconds to process what was happening before the Chemsuri's 2 halves drifted apart, venting flame and air and the small silent shapes of people. Then she started fighting. Captain Wu received Rin's distress signal from 11 light minutes away. He was running a resupply operation, dull, unglamorous work, moving fuel cells and food packages between stations. When the signal came through, his heart stopped for a second. Then he was already moving toward the navigation console, before his mind had consciously decided to. New heading, he said. Kepler corridor, maximum speed. His first officer looked at him. Sir, we are a resupply vessel. We have no... New heading, Wu said again. Maximum speed. He arrived at the corridor 2 hours and 20 minutes later, which was not fast enough to help in the fight. The fight was already over by then. What was left was a debris field that stretched for 40,000 kilometers, and a handful of ships still holding together by varying degrees of luck and emergency systems. Rin's own vessel was one of them. It was missing its entire rear section, and was running on backup power, but it was there. Wu docked where he could, and started moving people. He did not sleep for 4 days. Neither did most of his crew. They pulled survivors from ships that were falling apart around them, sometimes cutting through hull sections with tools that were meant for cargo work, not rescue. They transferred people through airlocks that were not designed to connect to military vessels. They ran out of medical supplies on day 2, and started improvising, sealing wounds with cargo sealant, which was not designed for that purpose, but worked well enough to keep people alive long enough to matter. Rin was the last one off her ship. She came through the airlock with blood dried on the left side of her face, and her jacket burned through at the shoulder. And when Wu met her, she looked at him for a long moment before she said anything. "How many?" she asked. Out of 180 crew across 12 ships, 63 had survived. Rin nodded slowly. She did not cry. She was not the type. But she put her back against the wall of the corridor and closed her eyes for a moment. And Wu stood beside her and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. The Vel'Karath had expected the Kepler ambush to do more than it did. They had expected it to break momentum, to send a signal to the human fleet that engaging the Empire was not a survivable choice. Instead, what happened over the following 3 weeks was something the Vel'Karath High Council's military analysts struggled to classify. Humanity got angry. Not the disorganized, desperate kind of angry that the Empire had seen in other species, the kind that led to reckless attacks and easy victories. This was a different kind. It was cold and methodical and deeply, deeply focused. The human fleet did not retreat after Kepler. Within 48 hours of the ambush, new patrol patterns had been established that made another trap of the same kind nearly impossible. Within a week, human ships were operating in smaller, faster groups that were harder to track and harder to pin down. Within 2 weeks, those groups had begun hitting Vel'Karath's supply lines. Not major targets, just the smaller support vessels and fuel depots that kept the Empire's forces in the region operational. Nothing dramatic, nothing glory-seeking, just quiet, persistent, grinding damage to the infrastructure that the Vel'Karath needed to sustain a campaign this far from their home systems. It was the kind of strategy that required patience and discipline, and a very clear understanding of what actually mattered in a long war. The Vel'Karath had not seen it coming, because they had not thought humanity capable of it. They were revising that assessment quickly. In one of the asteroid belt's staging areas that human forces had quietly converted into a forward base, a team of engineers under Sora's supervision was doing something that had never been attempted before. They were taking apart a disabled Vel'Karath warship. The ship had been drifting since the first engagement, its crew evacuated or dead, its systems in a partial shutdown state. A salvage team had towed it carefully into the asteroid belt and hidden it inside a hollowed-out rock that was now technically a shipyard. Sora moved through its interior with a scanner and a recording tablet, and the focused expression of someone who had found exactly the thing they had spent their whole career hoping to find. The Vel'Karath built differently. Their power systems were more efficient than anything humanity had developed. Not dramatically so, but meaningfully. Their hull materials were lighter and stronger in specific stress configurations. Their communication arrays operated on frequencies that human ships could not currently broadcast on, which was why the Empire had been able to coordinate the Kepler trap without being intercepted. Sora cataloged everything. She took samples. She made recordings. She sat in the alien engine room for 6 hours straight, eating a nutrition bar she had forgotten was in her pocket, just looking at how things connected to other things. Then she went back to her workspace and started figuring out how to copy it. Not all of it, not immediately, but the communication frequencies, those she could work with inside 2 weeks. She was certain of it. And if human ships could monitor Vel'Karath command channels, the ambush at Kepler would be the last successful trap the Empire managed to set. She worked. She always worked. The Vel'Karath High Council reviewed their campaign progress report on the 42nd day of the war. The suppression operation, which had been projected to take 2 weeks, had not ended. 3 more warships had been lost to human engagements. Supply line disruptions had slowed the regional fleet's operational capacity by an estimated 30%. Two of the forward staging areas the Empire had established in the outer system had been destroyed by human strike teams that had appeared from directions sensors had not flagged as threats. The senior advisor, who had ordered the military assessment, looked at the numbers for a long time. He had been a part of the Empire's military apparatus for 60 years. He had overseen 11 suppression operations and 2 full-scale wars against species that had actually posed a real challenge. He knew what a losing campaign looked like in its early stages, the slow accumulation of unexpected costs, the gradual erosion of the tactical assumptions you had built your plan on, the creeping realization that the enemy was not doing what they were supposed to do. He knew what it looked like. He was looking at it now. "Recommend we escalate to full war fleet deployment," he said. Around the table, his colleagues agreed. Of course they agreed. The Empire did not back down from species that had not yet been broken. But somewhere, beneath the institutional certainty and the long history of victories, the advisor felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Doubt. It was small. It was early. He pushed it aside. The Galactic Empire required tribute. Humanity declared war. Part 2. The Reckoning begins. The first thing Lieutenant Day did when he received his orders was check them twice. Not because he doubted them. He had been waiting for orders like these for 9 years, ever since he signed on with the Deep Space Naval Division, straight out of university, and was assigned to a ship that officially did not exist. He checked them twice because he was careful by nature, and because careful men tended to survive the things that killed everyone else. The orders were simple. Take the 3rd Rapid Response Fleet past the Moon's shadow. Engage any Velkarath vessel outside Earth's orbital boundary. Do not wait for them to fire first. Day folded the orders, tucked them into his front pocket, and went to find his crew. The ship he commanded was called the Harangue. It was not beautiful. It was a mid-weight strike vessel, roughly 200 meters long, built in a shipyard on the dark side of the moon over the course of 7 years by workers who had signed contracts that included lifetime confidentiality agreements. It looked, from the outside, like a modified cargo hauler, because it was supposed to. The Velkarath, who had been watching Earth's public communications and visible space traffic for a century, had never seen it. Had never seen any of the 43 ships like it that now sat quietly in hidden berths across the lunar surface, waiting. It had done very thorough work, by any standard. It had simply watched wrong things. Engineer Sora had not slept properly in 3 days, which was normal for her during a launch preparation. She was 34 years old, short, and had a habit of talking to machinery the way other people talk to pets. She was also the reason the Harangue and every ship in the 3rd Fleet had a fighting chance against Velkarath shielding. 4 years ago, Sora had been assigned to analyze a piece of salvage, a fragment of metal recovered from an object that had burned up in Earth's upper atmosphere 18 months prior. Most of her colleagues had concluded it was space debris. Sora had looked at the alloy composition and the molecular structure, and decided it was nothing of the sort. She had spent the next 8 months quietly and obsessively studying it on her own time, without telling her superiors, because she did not want to be wrong in front of anyone important. She was not wrong. The fragment was a piece of a Velkarath sensor drone, one of dozens the Empire had been quietly scattering through human space for decades to monitor Earth. And embedded in its core systems, still partially active, were the harmonic frequency signatures of Velkarath military shielding. Sora had not reported this finding immediately. She had first spent 6 weeks reverse engineering the frequencies, building a model of how the shields worked, and figuring out exactly which wavelengths of directed energy would slip through the gaps in the harmonic pattern, like a key through a lock. Then she had written it all up, filed it with her commanding officer, and gone home and slept for 14 hours straight. The weapons systems on every ship in the Hidden Fleet had been quietly adjusted over the following 2 years. Nobody announced it. Nobody celebrated it. It was simply done, the way a great deal of humanity's most important work was done, without fanfare, by people whose names would never appear in any public record. Now sitting in the harangue's engineering bay, with 3 junior technicians running final checks around her, Sora ran her own check one more time. The targeting systems were calibrated. The frequency modulators were set. She looked at the readout, nodded once, and said, "Good," to nobody in particular. The Vel'Karath suppression fleet arrived 41 hours after the tribute demand had been rejected. It was not their full strength, not even close. The Empire had sent a suppression force, which was what they used on species that needed to be reminded of reality before they could be reasoned with. Each one between 3 and 5 kilometers long. Each one carrying weapons that had reduced cities to glass on a dozen different worlds. They came out of their jump point in a standard formation, moving toward Earth at a pace that suggested they were not worried. Because they were not. The Vel'Karath fleet commander, a veteran of 11 suppression operations, looked at his sensor readout and saw what he expected to see. A small scattering of human vessels, disorganized, moving in patterns that suggested panic. He counted them. 31 ships, most of them small. He noted their positions, and began issuing targeting orders. He did not notice that they were not moving in panic. They were moving into position. Day's voice came over the fleet-wide channel, calm and even. "All ships hold pattern until my mark. Target lock on primary designations." "On my mark." The Vel'Karath commander raised his weapons to firing charge. "Mark," said Day. 43 railguns fired simultaneously. The Vel'Karath's shields, which had never met a weapon tuned to their harmonic frequency gaps, held for approximately 1 second. Then, they failed. Not partially, completely. The energy simply passed through them the way light passes through glass. And what was on the other side of that glass was not prepared for it at all. The first Vel'Karath warship came apart in a cascade of secondary explosions that lit up the space around it like a small, brief sun. The second and third ships broke formation immediately and began to return fire. Their weapons were powerful. 2 of humanity's smaller escort vessels caught direct hits and were destroyed instantly, their crews gone in a fraction of a second. Dane noted the losses, felt the cold weight of them, and kept his voice steady. "Focus fire on the lead vessel." The 4th ship tried to jump. Its drive systems were hit before it could complete the calculation. It spun slowly, venting atmosphere from 3 hull breaches. In 11 minutes, the engagement was over. 3 Vel'Karath warships were destroyed. 2 were disabled and drifting. 2 had managed to complete jumps and flee. Humanity had lost 7 ships and 412 crew members. Day stood at the viewscreen and looked at the debris field spreading slowly through the dark. He did not feel like celebrating. The galaxy did not hear about the battle immediately. News traveled at the speed of ships and signal relays, which meant the Vel'Karath High Council received their fleet commander's final automated distress transmission about 19 hours after the engagement ended. The Council reviewed the data in silence. 3 warships lost, 2 disabled, 2 fled, against a species that was not supposed to have weapons capable of penetrating Vel'Karath military shielding. Against a species that had responded to a standard tribute demand with armed force. Against a species that, according to a century of observation, had no deep space military capability worth noting. The Council's senior advisor reviewed the transmission 3 more times. Then he did something he had not done in a very long time. He called for a full military assessment. Not because he was afraid. He told himself it was simply due diligence. Standard procedure when a suppression operation encountered unexpected variables. But there was something in the sensor data from those final 11 minutes. Something in the precision of the human attack pattern the way their ships had moved, the way their weapons had performed, that sat in the back of his mind and would not leave. They had been ready, he kept thinking. They had been ready for this. He did not yet understand what that meant, but somewhere in a part of his mind that dealt in old patterns and long experience, something had begun to wake up. Something that felt, if he was being entirely honest with himself, a great deal like unease. The Galactic Empire required tribute. Humanity declared war. Part 1. The Demand. The ship appeared without warning. One moment, the space above Earth was quiet. Just satellites drifting in slow orbits, and a few cargo shuttles moving between stations. The next moment, something was there. Something enormous. It did not come through any jump point that humanity's sensors had detected. It did not slow down as it approached. It simply appeared, the way a stone appears when you lift a hand from water, sudden and heavy and impossible to ignore. Admiral Junho was eating breakfast when the alert came through. He was at the orbital station above Earth, sitting in the small cafeteria with a cup of coffee going cold beside him, reading a report about fuel costs. His tablet buzzed. Then it buzzed again. Then the alarm on the wall began to scream. He was on the command deck in 4 minutes. The ship on the view screen was unlike anything in humanity's records. It was not sleek or elegant the way science fiction had always imagined alien vessels to be. It was massive and ugly and ancient-looking, like something that had been built and then added to for thousands of years, without anyone caring much about how it looked. Dark metal panels covered its surface in uneven layers. Strange lights pulsed along its underside in slow rhythms. It was roughly triangular, but not cleanly so. Its edges were jagged, its corners uneven. It looked like a mountain that had decided to float. Size? Junho asked. 14 kilometers long, said the officer beside him, give or take. Junho said nothing. He just looked at it. The communication came 20 minutes later. It was not a greeting. It was not an introduction. There was no hello, no name, no explanation of who they were or where they had come from. It was simply a list of terms, transmitted in 17 different Earth languages simultaneously, which meant they had been listening to humanity for a very long time. The message was read aloud on the command deck by the station's translation system in a flat, calm voice, which somehow made it worse. The Velkarath Empire, the message said, had observed the human species for 112 years. In that time, humanity had demonstrated enough intelligence to be useful, but not enough power to be threatening. The Empire was therefore extending to humanity the standard arrangement offered to developing species. 1 billion humans, healthy, between the ages of 16 and 40, were to be prepared for transport. They would serve the Empire in various labor capacities for a period of no less than 30 years. In return, the Empire would not destroy the planet. Humanity had 90 days to comply. Non-compliance would be treated as aggression. The message ended. No one on the command deck spoke for a long moment. Junho set his coffee cup down very carefully on the edge of the console. He looked at the view screen. The alien ship floated there, enormous and patient, like it had all the time in the galaxy. "Get me Secretary General Ara," he said. Ara was a small woman with short hair and dark eyes that missed very little. She had been Secretary General of the United Earth Council for 6 years. And in those 6 years, she had dealt with famine negotiations, resource wars, 3 attempted coups in different regions, and a particularly unpleasant trade dispute that had nearly collapsed the Pacific Alliance. She was not a woman who panicked easily, but when she read the Velkarath message, her hands went still on the table. Then, a third time. Then she called the emergency summit. Every national leader, every regional governor, every military commander of significance was patched in within 2 hours. The orbital station's main conference room was packed. The rest attended by holographic link, their faces floating in blue-tinted squares around the walls. Ara stood at the head of the long table and let them talk for 30 minutes. The confusion, the fear, the disbelief, the demands for verification, the questions about whether this was some kind of elaborate deception. Then she raised one hand, and the room went quiet. "It is real," she said. "The ship is real. The message is real. We have confirmed it 6 different ways in the last 2 hours." She paused. "Now I need to know what we are going to do about it." More talking, more argument. Some voices said negotiate. Some said comply. At least partially, at least enough to buy time. A governor from the Northern Coalition said that 1 billion was too many, but perhaps a smaller number could be discussed. A military commander from the Eastern Bloc said that discussing any number was surrender, and that surrender was not something his people would accept. Admiral Junho sat near the end of the table and said nothing for most of it. He listened. He watched the faces. He waited. When Ara finally looked at him, because she always eventually looked at him in rooms like this, he leaned forward in his chair. "They think we are afraid," he said. His voice was quiet, not angry, just certain. That message was not written by someone who considered us a threat. It was written by someone who considered us convenient, like livestock. They did not come here to negotiate. They came here to collect. He looked around the room. If we give them one person, they will come back in 30 years and ask for 2 billion. And the time after that, they will not ask at all. The room was very quiet. "They mistook our patience for weakness," he said. "I think it is time to show them the difference." The vote took 11 minutes. It was not unanimous by much. There were 14 abstentions and 6 votes against, but the rest of them, the vast majority, voted yes. Humanity declared war on the Velkarath Empire on a Tuesday morning, while the alien ship still hung in orbit above the planet like it owned the sky. The Velkarath ambassador, a tall, gray-skinned creature with 4 arms and eyes that reflected light like mirrors, received the response with what its kind expressed as mild confusion. It reviewed the transmission 3 times, then it sent a message back to its superiors. "The humans have responded negatively," it wrote. "They appear to believe armed resistance is a viable option. Recommend we proceed with standard suppression protocol. Estimated time to compliance, 2 weeks." It did not occur to the ambassador that it might be wrong. It had never been wrong before. In 400 years of service to the Empire, every species that had received the tribute demand had eventually complied. Some quickly, some slowly. But all of them, in the end, had understood the reality of their situation and accepted it. The ambassador looked out at the small blue planet below and felt nothing in particular. It began preparing the suppression fleet request. It did not know, could not know, had no way of knowing, that down on that small blue planet, in 1,000 different facilities that had been kept very carefully off every public record for the last 40 years, humanity had been preparing for exactly this moment. Not this moment specifically, but a moment like it. They had always known, somewhere in the back of their collective mind, that the universe was too large and too old for humanity to be the only ones in it. And they had always known, because history had taught them, over and over, in every era and on every continent, what happened to people who were unprepared when something stronger came knocking. So they had prepared, quietly, patiently, without telling anyone. The way humanity always did its most serious work.